Today on Metaphysical Mississippi, we have a guest podcast host, Beth Herzig, with the Flowering Lotus Meditation podcast. She'll be interviewing Dave Smith, who has an upcoming event for July 22nd. It's an online retreat. So let's get into the show.
Welcome, Dave Smith, to the Flowering Lotus Meditation podcast. We wanted to hang out with you a little bit and talk to you about our upcoming class we have going with you, which is July 22nd.
Cool.
And so welcome, and just wanted to see how you're doing today.
Good. Actually, today is my 20-year sobriety anniversary.
Wow, happy birthday.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's interesting time I almost don't believe I'm like 20 years. No way. It's a long time.
Yeah, well, congratulations. And I feel like you've helped people so much in that space since that 20-year point. So do you want to talk a little bit about how you found practice and possibly how that has impacted your sobriety?
Yeah, sure. As is often the case, the story is quite roundabout. I found practice, about 10 years before I even got sober. So I grew up down the street from Daniel Goleman, the emotional intelligence writer, and was introduced to IMS, Insight Meditation Society, and people like Joseph Goldstein and Steve Armstrong and Stephen Smith. So I kind of knew about these guys because they were my friends' dad's friends. And none of my, in growing up kind of blue collar construction life that I lived in, I'd never met anybody up till then. None of my friends' parents were like that. They were just sort of boring people who, were like, 80s working mentality, John Hughes kind of parents. So because I had so much trauma, I sense that, or I suspect that some of the people that I knew, my friends' mom and dad, they kind of maybe knew that something wasn't quite right with me. So I got introduced to, I started sitting 10-day Vipassana retreats in 93 when I was I was 18. And the funny thing was I was, obviously in the early 90s, this stuff has gone bonkers. Like in 93, nobody knew anything about any of this stuff. So I was definitely by far the youngest person sitting on retreat. And then funnily enough, I was sitting a 7-day retreat last week at Vallecitos in New Mexico. And I was still the youngest person on the goddamn retreat. It's like, I've been the youngest person on the retreat for 30 years. Now I teach retreats. So the whole thing is kind of funny. And then, then I got sober in 2003. And I sat the 3-month retreat at IMS with 60 days sobriety, which I don't recommend people do. And so I kind of weave these two worlds. I don't really, at this point, we can talk as much about it as you want to. I'm not really that interested in the whole recovery thing anymore. I did it for so long. I was part of so many different things. And I actually am more interested in from a clinical point of view. I've been a member of the 12-step program for 20 years and find them to be valuable and helpful and don't have anything bad to say about that world. Very disappointed about the status of the Buddhist recovery world. I think that really, we can talk about that a little bit if you like, but I think that has not really ripened in the way that a lot of us thought it was going to. And then what I find now a lot of days is that people that I work with, a lot of people will go, and I have many students, and I know tons of people who kind of got sober. Maybe they got a year under their belt or just a little bit of time, and then they start working with me or they start doing Dharma practice, and they're like, can I just do Dharma? Like, why do I have to do recovery, Buddhist recovery, Dharma recovery, whatever it is? Can I just have a Dharma practice and will that suffice? And my general answer was like, well, let's see. But I find that it does for most people. And also, it's also clear, like Buddhist recovery is a bit of a redundant term because, or dharma recovery, let's just use that word. Dharma recovery is no different than regular dharma practice. So, it's not like a Buddhist perspective on recovery, it's just Buddhism. So the recovery part of it does make it a little bit clunky. The only thing that I think stands out is that it's Buddhism for, and me and my wife talked about this because she's been in recovery a long time. It's really just Buddhism for people in recovery.
Right.
It's really a Dharma affinity group. Is really what it is. And the one thing that I really don't like is that a lot of Dharma, Buddhist recovery circle communities, it turns into a place where they just kind of bash AA and different 12-step modalities. And I think that that's very destructive.
I think too, though, some people who enter recovery, when they start to go to AA and they just hear the word God, they may have like some religious trauma or like some sort of, growing up around Christianity. And so then it, helps them to see it, the same sort of teachings, but from a different perspective, maybe.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. That is often the case. I've certainly ran into those people, but that's a very small percentage. Most people just don't like the word God, and it's like, just, you need to get over that shit.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, even the 12 steps says that, God as you understand him. And if you understand that there is no God, which is my understanding, then, so the person that I give the most credit to, I think, who has done the best job by far, is Kevin Griffin. And that would be his blending of Buddhism and the 12 steps, I think, has been the most successful perspective on that. But you're right, it's a messy world with people who are really, hurting in many, many different ways. So I'm a huge supporter of it. I just find that it's a lot of complications and a lot of messiness that seems to be going through some serious growth spurts, perhaps.
Right. So tell me a little bit about your retreat. I listened to your podcast talking about that you finally went on retreat. So you hadn't gone on retreat for a little while.
Yeah, no, it was great. I generally think that you should, if you're a dedicated practitioner, my general assessment for people is try to sit 5 days a week for 30 minutes and try to get on at least one multi-day silent retreat a year, preferably a week. If you can do 2, that's even better. But I think a week a year on retreat's about the minimal. And I will blame COVID for much of this. There was a 3-year period of time where nobody could go on retreat. And so I probably should have gone last summer, but I didn't. And I just went to a place called Vallecitos, which is an insight center in northern New Mexico that's run by one of the founding teachers, Aaron Treat, who's a friend of mine, a really great Dharma teacher. And I sat with a teacher named Mark Coleman, who does these retreats called Awake in the Wild. So the whole retreat was outside in the woods, getting back to kind of what the Buddha was doing. The Buddha was, not in a building. He was, him and his early followers, they were sitting in the forest. The Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree, right? So, we spent 7 days outside, walking, meandering, sitting, practicing a kind of more of an open awareness practice, kind of, I would say, probably in the vein of Sayadaw Tejaniya's natural awareness practice. And oh man, it was so fabulous. It was so inspiring. It was so great. It was so great to not have to deal with my phone or like, it was just, so I feel very rejuvenated and really fresh and inspired. I'm really, and probably might sit that same retreat again next year.
Open awareness out in the open.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for agreeing to do a course with us. It'll be a 1-day, just half-day course on the Four Noble Truths and mindfulness.
Sure.
And, I don't know if you're aware, but Flowering Lotus, we travel around and do kind of what I would call pop-up retreats. So we don't have.
Yes, I've heard. I know that Andrew Chapman just did one for you guys.
Yeah, Andrew and Mikey were with us last weekend. We had about 35 people and from 5 states. So that was pretty awesome. And yeah, so in that same way that we really want to allow there to be accessibility to the teachings and meet people where they are, tell us a little bit about what you're planning on teaching about within that, framework of the Four Noble Truths and mindfulness, what
Yeah,
can
well,
people expect?
yeah, what a can of worms, right? Yeah, and I've been teaching this class for a while, and let me just think about where to start, because these are two of the most massive ideas in Buddhist thought. So you have mindfulness, which is kind of the OG Buddhist meditation. It's what the Buddha taught. It's within the Satipatthana Sutta. It's probably his most profound, I think, his most profound discovery, and his most profound gift to humanity is the way that he understood, developed, and really offers the teachings on mindfulness. That's just in every Buddhist tradition, is would agree on this. This is sort of the heart of Buddhist meditation. And on the other side of that, the probably most famous, most well-known, and I would say actually quite controversial teaching is the teachings of the Four Noble Truths, which is actually understood to be his first teaching. Which actually we can talk about this a little bit, but we know from an academic survey of the early Pali Canon, definitely not his first teaching. In fact, he probably didn't develop the Four Noble Truths till maybe close to halfway through his teaching career.
Wow, I didn't know.
So no, nobody knows that. That's sort of the funny thing about it. So I think the Four Noble Truths are not they're not a description of reality and sort of how reality works. Thought of. They're a prescription. They're actually they're four tasks. They're four injunctions. They're actually mindfulness practices that we can recognize, that we can adhere to, that we can see really, really clearly. And when you bring mindfulness and the Four Noble Truths together as an integrated practice, you get something a lot more useful, a lot more pragmatic than what sort of happens is the Four Noble Truths become sort of the doctrine in which Buddhists believe in. And also too, in the original text, the word noble truth was not there. That was a later addition. And I don't know about where you stand on this, but for me, the word noble truth reeks of religion.
Right. Yeah.
The noble truth. And also you see noble truth with capital N, capital T. So they're privileged. They're meant to stand out. There's no capital letters in Pali. There's no capital letters in Pali, Sanskrit, Tibetan, or Chinese. Any of the Asian Buddhist languages, they don't have that way in which in English we privilege a word by capitalizing it. So that was a later addition. And I think the biggest problem with the Four Noble Truths, and the biggest problem I have with them, and the majority of the work that I do now in the area that I'm moving into, primarily inspired by teacher Stephen Batchelor, who I've been working with for about 10 years, is that the Four Noble Truths is that there is suffering, there is a cause of suffering, there is the end of suffering, and then there is the path that leads to the end of suffering. You will see the Four Noble Truths delivered in that format in probably 99% of books on Buddhism. Now, if you look at the original text, if you look at the way they're talked about in the Pali Canon, you see a completely different rendition. You see it delivered in a much different way. The one that sticks out like a sore thumb is the way I just presented them, the way that Buddhism presented them. If you notice, the word suffering is listed in all four. But the word suffering, which we know comes from this Pali word dukkha, a word that's probably impossible to translate. Suffering, I guess, good enough. We're stuck with it anyway, so we might as well just deal with it. The way that it's originally delivered is that, first of all, there is no end of dukkha. We're not going to get to the end of dukkha. We're actually trying to embrace dukkha. He describes what dukkha is. He says dukkha is birth, old age, sickness, and death. I don't see how we're going to get to the end of that.
Right.
He says that dukkha is about when you don't get what you want, that's dukkha. I don't see how that's going to stop happening. When things that you don't want to happen, when you lose things that you care about, people, places, animals, jobs, relationships, money, I don't see that ever stopping. And so I think that what happens is now we get into, not to get too technical, but I think one of the greatest kind of crimes, if I can use that word, or one of the greatest missteps in Buddhist thought was when they translated the second noble truth as the cause of dukkha is craving, which is kind of the standard thing. You know, for me it almost seems even a bit arrogant for me to say that they got that wrong, because that's sort of, you know, that is Buddhist 101, you know, craving is the cause of dukkha. Well, that's not what the text says, nor does it say close to it. So this word samudaya, which is the word that gets translated, means something that is arising. And so cause, or sometimes it's origin. So samudaya got translated as cause or origin, which is actually not just a slightly off translation, but a completely incorrect translation. In fact, there are other words in Pali for cause. So the Buddha could have easily used a whole range of other words if he wanted to do that. So, you know, it's basically, it's not that the craving or the tanha is causing the dukkha. It's that the craving and the tanha is arising out of it. Right?
Wanting it to be different.
Wanting it to be different. So, you know, dukkha doesn't really have a cause. Dukkha is just sort of the existential dilemma of the human experience. You know, and the other thing that's interesting too is, of course, suffering in the English language is a word that's very pejorative. Nobody wants to suffer. Like suffering is like the worst thing ever, right? And so, but when you look at dukkha, the Buddha doesn't actually speak of dukkha in a pejorative tone. He doesn't speak of it as being bad or wrong. He doesn't have the negativity that we do in English, or that even the Buddhist world. I actually think Buddhism has declared a war on dukkha, which has been, I think, really a bad move. So he just talks about it as like, yeah, dukkha is like part of this world. He even says the five aggregates are dukkha. You know, we're really trying to embrace that rather than trying to put an end to that. Now, embracing something and putting an end to something are very, very, very different, maybe even opposite positions. And so even trying to end dukkha, to me, one of the other things that makes that problem, is that completely, I think, unrealistic. And second of all, I think there's a lot of aversion built into that idea. Dukkha is bad and wrong, and I need to be rid of it. And one of the reasons why I harp on this so much is not because I don't care really at all about all this academic stuff I'm pointing to. I mean, you know, I think it's interesting and valuable, but the real reason why I kind of get on my soapbox about this is that I spent years of my life, 10, 15 years of my life, really believing, taking the text for face value and really thinking that I could put an end to dukkha. And in my inability to do so, I felt like I was a bad meditator. I felt like I was kind of maybe even stupid. I actually picked up a lot of other side effects, you know, kind of denying myself certain aspects of my desire system, living in denial, living in kind of creating versions of myself. And also when you start teaching this stuff, the thing that really made me wake up to it was like, I don't know. I was like, I don't believe this anymore. I can't teach this. I don't believe that. Actually, I never really believe the whole getting into the whole getting rid of suffering business always never landed really right with me. I mean, it's a very attractive idea. Let's just be honest. It looks really good on the flyer, you know, but I never sat really well with me. And then, of course, when Stephen started doing his work and other academics, when I started to wake up to the fact of actually, no, they got that part wrong, that really kind of, I was like, oh, thank God.
Yeah.
Now that I know that suffering's here to stay, I can relax.
Right. So I feel like, to me, there's like this avoidance of accepting suffering as natural, you know? And I appreciate just this conversation because it's waking me up to that aspect of things. Because like you said, it is just seemingly assumed and understood within the Buddhist community that it was the first way you described it.
Right, which also I know, even sitting here, I can even feel it in my system. Like, it definitely comes across as like kind of a radical arrogance. Like, who am I, Dave Smith? It's like, you know, to say that Buddhism got the Four Noble. It's such an arrogant kind of statement to make, but it's, you know, the Buddha said, you know, and I also rest on this, and maybe for some people it is. I don't know. It's just my experience, you know. But you know, the Buddha said, "Come and see for yourself." Ehipassiko. And I've come and seen for myself, and I can certainly tell you, in 30 years of practice, and also being a specialist in addiction. And I think that we can talk about this if you want. The second noble truth is all about addiction. I've come to see from my own experience that dukkha is here to stay. And I actually am a much happier person now that I've shifted my practice to an embracing of dukkha and seeing the Four Noble Truths as 4 tasks to perform. I'm just much happier. I feel like I teach better. I feel whole much better about the whole damn project. So, you know, and a lot of people I think are waking up to this, but it is kind of a slippery thing to say.
Right, right. So in that same vein, as far as mindfulness, do you feel like the common definition of mindfulness is the same, or do you feel like it's different?
What do you mean?
That mindfulness is, you know, accepting things for as they are without judgment. I mean, does that ring true for you?
Not so much. I think mindfulness is it's a clunky term. You know, it comes from this Pali word sati, which actually literally means to remember. Now, how they went from remembering to mindfulness, and we're stuck with it. We're not going to convince anybody to retranslate the word mindfulness. It's not terrible, but I think that it's very difficult to define. It would be like me asking you to define the word art. What is art?
Yeah.
You know, just give me a quick definition of the word art, or even love. What is love? It's one of those words. It's such a huge concept that to try to even break it down in 1 or 2 sentences, mindfulness probably needs at least a paragraph. So the other thing people don't know about mindfulness oftentimes when you look at the Pali text is that, and this is very clearly outlined, is that there's different kinds of mindfulness on different occasions for different purposes. So really, we would say that mindfulness is an innate and trainable mode of cognition that human beings, just all of us, have access to. It's not uniquely Buddhist at all. This is why secular mindfulness, I think, has blown up. You know, it's not like, it's not like the Buddhists own mindfulness and we invented it. The Buddha what he did is he woke up to his own mind and realized that he could actually watch his own mind with his mind, which is kind of what mindfulness is. It's the ability to observe the inner contents of your mind, the outer contents of your mind, and the interplay between those two, which, kind of amazing. And then, so it's really kind of a mode of cognition that has different kinds of functions on different occasions for different purposes. It's very, very dynamic. So to try to pin it down to say mindfulness is this, mindfulness might look like this in one moment, and it might look like something else in a different moment. So I think it's a very dynamic experience. And one of the things that we're doing, we can talk about this a bit too, if you like, we do have a program that I developed with Stephen Bathard called Mindfulness-Based Ethical Living, which is using these ideas, using 4 tasks and using mindfulness. And so what we do is we talk about we kind of break down, of course, who doesn't love a list of 4, that there's 4 kinds of mindfulness that correlate to each truth, or we could say task would be the word I would prefer. So the first one is mindfulness of an existential nature, which is all about dukkha. Like, you were born, you've gotten older, you know you're going to die. How do we deal as human beings, knowing that our life is going to end, knowing that we live in a finite world, knowing that everything we care about we're going to lose, and actually dealing with the darkness and the kind of scariness of the existential dilemma that we are in? Mindfulness really, we need to, there's a philosophical almost nature to that, of like, well, if everything I just said is true, then what is it that I want to do with this life? Do I want to just, and this is where it really becomes countercultural. Do I just want to go to the right school, get a job, meet the right person, live in the right neighborhood, get the right job, and basically the general kind of American way that we deal with the existential dilemma is life is about getting what I want, and avoiding what I don't want, and trying to make enough of money, and trying to navigate the secular contemporary world, which is a very scary and untrusting and do I want to just play by that game, which most people do and have found it to be very unfruitful, or do I want to do something else? And then that something else usually puts us in some kind of an existential dilemma of like, well, what is that? And how do I do that? And I still actually have to I want to have a decent car, and I want to live in a house, and I want to have money, and I want to be able to provide for myself. So you have to deal with the world. And so that's a whole, we could talk about that for hours. That's a whole
Right.
thing. That's just the first one. The second aspect of mindfulness that we talk about, I'll talk about this in the half day, and this is about the second truth, or the second task, is or the second effort. All these lists line up, ironically, is that how do we overcome these destructive forces in the mind? How do we overcome clinging and craving and all of that second noble truth territory? That's a mindfulness that's very therapeutic. And that's really what secular mindfulness, or MBSR, is. It's a therapeutic mindfulness that says,
Right.
how can I recognize the destructive tendencies of my own mind, which we all have: greed, hatred, confusion, the hindrances. There's a whole sophisticated, precise taxonomy of terminology in Buddhist literature that talks about the things in the mind we should be free from. And that's across the board. There's list upon list of those things. And so we want to be able to be free from those things, and that's a therapeutic way of looking at it. The third task was about nibbana, or nirodha, being free from being. What does it mean to be free from that? That's a mindfulness that's of a contemplative nature, being able to practice non-reactivity, being in the experience of nibbana, the passing away of the overcoming of the craving, of the grasping, of the fueling, to be in a mind that's balanced, at ease, that's spacious. That's very existential. I'm not sorry, existential, very contemplative. And then the fourth kind of mindfulness would be ethical mindfulness, which, ironically enough, I wrote an ebook about 10 years ago called Ethical Mindfulness. And I remember when I wrote the book, I was teaching at an addictions conference, and I did a kind of a presentation on Buddhist psychology and addiction. And somebody came up to me after that and said, "We'd love to do a book with you." And I said, "Well, I want to do a book on ethical mindfulness." And I kind of wrote some proposals. There was some back and forth. They didn't think either the title was good enough or the book was good enough. They didn't want to invest the money for it to be a print book. So it ended up being downgraded into an ebook. So I have an ebook out there called Ethical Mindfulness. You can get it anywhere for $2. But that was, so the fourth, which is the cultivation of the Eightfold Path, which is how we live in the world. How do I engage in the world? How do I bring mindfulness to money, to relationships, to social issues, to racism, to all of those things? That's a mindfulness that's ethical. And so when you kind of start thinking about everything I just said, all of a sudden mindfulness starts to become, whoa, we're talking about a lot of different things. And we're not just talking about paying attention on purpose in the present moment.
Right. So that program that you're talking about, when are you doing that? How do people get information about that?
I can give you a link if you want.
Okay.
It's open now. It doesn't start for a while. The registration just opened and people are actually signing up, which is great. But it starts in January 2024.
Nice.
It's an 8-month program. It's online and in person.
Okay,
so
great.
It starts in January, ends in September.
Mm-hmm.
There's 2 7-day in-person retreats, one in March and one in September. So the program will end at the second retreat.
Nice.
And there's 2 retreats. There's also an online learning library, which will kind of go through a lot of the stuff I've mentioned. And there'll also be monthly teaching sessions that I'll be conducting. Stephen Batchelor will be in the program. He'll only be on Zoom. I just want to make sure I'm clear about that. He's not going to fly over. He lives in France.
Yeah.
He's going to be doing some of the modules. He'll be doing some Zoom teaching. It's a pretty small program. I think that the program is limited to 40 people.
Yeah.
But what it is it's a kind of a merger of trying to find, dare I say, a middle way between early Buddhist thought and secular mindfulness, and trying to bring these ideas together so that way we're getting the best of the both worlds. So a lot of the emphasis, a lot of the teachings, a lot of the philosophy, a lot of the ethics, a lot of the psychology comes from the Pali literature, and then mindfulness in its multiple ways that it's being adapted and used now. Some of it from a Buddhist context, Satipatthana, some of it the work of John Kabat-Zinn or MBCT. Mindfulness, as you know, is sort of everywhere. And I think that we've learned a lot in the last 2,500 years, especially the way that we look at neuroscience and cognitive science and different therapies, trauma therapies. And we've made so many advancements in Western thought that to not incorporate the advancements that we've made into a contemplative practice like mindfulness it doesn't make sense to not do that. It seems like that's kind of the best of both worlds. So we're trying to dance, and we're trying to balance the line between those two.
It sounds really great. So send me the link and I'll include it in the show notes, as they say.
As the show notes, exactly.
Yeah. So what about, I did also see that you're doing a 10-day mentorship retreat. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
That's actually, it's actually 7 days, but that's
Oh,
okay.
7 days.
That one, there's only a couple spaces available. That one basically was a program that I developed. I have a mentoring program, and really was meant to just be invitational only to people in the mentoring program.
Okay.
But I knew I wouldn't get enough, because the retreat center has a 25-person minimum. So I knew I was going to be pushed, because I knew it was going to be tight. So
Right.
now we have about a month away. I've opened it up to people who want to. They can email me if they want.
Nice.
But yeah, that's in Big Bear, California. That's 7 days, Sunday to Sunday, August 13th through the 20th.
Okay.
So I think there's only like 3 or 4 spots left. If people want to jump on it, let me know.
Yeah. Well, and then for the half day that you're doing with us, we're starting at 8 a.m. Central Time, and then going
Which
to
is 7 a.m. for me.
Yeah, 7 a.m. for you.
Yeah.
And we'll go till noon. Will we be doing any practices, like meditating with you during that time?
Totally. Yeah. So this is good, actually, because what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at so in the Theravada Satipatthana, which is the teachings on mindfulness, in their version of it, in the 4th foundation of mindfulness, the mindfulness of dhammas, there's 5 categories of practice. The last one is 4 Noble Truths. So the 4 Noble Truths is in the teachings on mindfulness. So that gives me kind of a way of saying, okay, this is part of the system. It's not something that I'm making up or adding. And so we will be going through what I call there's lots of list of 4s, as I'm sure you've gathered. And so there's the 4 foundations of mindfulness. There's the 4 Noble Truths. There's the 4 great efforts. There's the 4 Brahma Viharas. There's the 4s upon 4s upon 4s. Now, the interesting thing is, if you take those lists and you turn them the other way, so say you take the first foundation of mindfulness, you take the body, you take the first noble truth, dukkha, you take the first great effort, prevent destructive forces of the mind. If you turn the list the other way and pull from the first one, you get a whole nother set of lists, actually. And it's a bit spooky, actually. When you do this little trick, you get a different set of lists that's very pragmatic. And so you understand that the first foundation of mindfulness is about the first noble truth. It's about dukkha. It's about embracing the body. It's about embracing the existential. I'm in a body. I'm a person in a body living in a world. And so what we'll do is I will be integrating all these 4 lists for people. So there'll be a teaching on an overarching teaching on integration of I call it the integration of 4s. Also, 4 is a kind of important number. Anyway, we have 4 elements. We have 4 seasons. We have 4 directions. Music, particularly rock music, pop culture music, is organized in 4/4 beats per measure, 4/4 time code. There's something about 4 that seems to be kind of important. And so we'll do I'll do a presentation on number 1, existential, dukkha, body, and we'll do a practice. I'll do a presentation on number 2, do a practice. So to some degree, people who are listening right now, some people are probably coming at this understanding what I'm saying, but I'm sorry, some of it, I tend to talk fast, and we're talking about a lot of stuff in a short period of time. So by coming to the half day, you'll at least get a sense, I hope by the end of it, a very practical, embodied sense of what it is that we're talking about, because we'll go through each one. So we have a 4-hour half day, so it gives me an hour to really get each one. So we can do it. I can do a teaching, we can do a practice, we can do a dialogue. My hope is that people will leave this, and this is a very well organized kind of system. This is not I feel very confident that people will really understand where I'm coming from, and really getting a sense, and really a useful sense of mindfulness, as again, not necessarily mindfulness in the Four Noble Truths, but more that there are certain tasks. And sometimes in life, my job is to, if my dog dies, and I'm really, really sad and I have to deal with that, then that's an existential kind of mindfulness. How can I use mindfulness to be in kindness with myself and embrace that experience? And to other times I might be arguing with a friend or a family member about something, and I'm very angry and upset. And maybe in that moment, I need a kind of more of a therapeutic mindfulness. See what I mean? Or maybe I'm out in nature and I'm taking a hike and I'm sitting and I'm practicing and I'm kind of reflecting, and maybe I sit down next to a river or sitting on a rock. That would be a very kind of contemplative kind of mindfulness. It wouldn't be, So I think that people will get a really good sense of where we're coming from. So I'm really I've done this mindfulness in the Four Noble Truths many times, but I usually do it in a 90-minute class, which is not really sufficient.
Yeah, I don't think it would be. That's really a lot to cover in that small amount of time. So I'm grateful for the 4 hours too. And
yeah, the other thing, it's a lot to cover, but it's also, again, not that much, because we're talking about, we're not talking about esoteric. We're talking about really core, fundamental stuff here. We're talking about 4 foundations of mindfulness, and 4 noble truths, and the 4 Brahma Viharas, and the 4 efforts. We're talking about really common, very, very common Buddhist teachings. And the good news is, I believe, once you get these kind of working for yourself, maybe that's all you need.
Right.
You don't need to go down these kind of rabbit holes around emptiness and not self, or 12 links of dependent origination, or some of these other teachings that can be very intellectually stimulating. This is a very pragmatic, useful practice that you can like put to work like immediately.
Right.
And to me, that's what mindfulness is about. It's about immediacy. What's going on right now. And you've probably noticed, if you've practiced a little while, there's always a lot going on right now.
Right. Exactly.
And I was sitting in the woods for a week, and I'm sitting in a chair in the middle of the woods in northern New Mexico with seemingly nothing to do, and fucking lot going on, man.
Yeah.
Like, a lot going on in my mind, a lot going on in nature. It's like, so it's it's good to be able to. I also find that when people start to integrate their meditation practice with Dharma teachings, and see that they're meant to be integrated. They're not like I sit on a cushion and then I read a book, which is how a lot of people end up. And I think a lot of people find that to be frustrating, irritating. They get to the point where they're like, well, I'm reading this stuff and then I'm sitting, but I don't see the interplay between the two. And I think when people see the interplay between the two, the study and the practice of the Dharma becomes very exciting.
Well, and the real way that we can implement all of that into interactions with others, and what's happening in our outward life with our job, our family, all of that. It's like, that's when the Dharma is alive in us, when we can see that and actually put it into practice. So I'm excited about that aspect of it. And I think I know conceptually that all of it's interrelated, but even just you talking about the fact that those first things are all interrelated on those lists of 4 is like blowing my mind a little bit.
It is, right?
In a good way.
People have been staring at this stuff for years, but it's it is hard. And also too, like a lot of people would say this, it's like, first of all, Buddhism, the religion of Buddhism, has largely and mostly ignored the teachings of the Pali Canon. And I don't mean that to be negative or to be blameworthy. They just didn't have it. It's like, when Bodhidharma went to China and brought Zen Buddhism or whatever, it's not like he had a fucking copy of the Pali Canon under his arm.
Right.
They just didn't know.
Yeah.
It wasn't really until modern scholarship, really within the last, I would say, 150, maybe 200 years, people have been looking at this text. So we've really only begun to scratch the surface as to what's actually contained, the messages, the theories, the psychology, totally exciting. So we're just barely scratching the surface on it. And now's a good time for it, because mindfulness is everywhere. There's lots of different ways to look at it. And also to say too, one of the criticisms that I get from time to time is I'm not at all wanting to come across as being anti-Buddhist or anti some of these teachings or other traditions. I consider myself a very good friend to Buddhism. Buddhism is my good friend.
Mm-hmm.
And like some of my good friends in life, some of my best friends in life, we don't agree on everything.
Right.
We don't see eye to eye on everything. We have some strong contention, and I think that's healthy and that's natural and that's important.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have to agree with it all, but I'm not trying to be dismissive of it or try to be judgmental of it. I just think it's totally fascinating that that this happens to be the case. And the other thing that's also really good, I think, about mindfulness-based ethical living and kind of the way I'll present this stuff is it's not going to be really in conflict with any other Buddhist thought or any other. It's going to be it's going to be a different lens, but not going to change a whole lot. But I think for people who are more secular minded, like myself, and also having an addiction background, it's having to be very, very clear and very realistic about what kind of benefits we can expect out of a practice like this, and what kind of things might actually be kind of impossible.
Yeah.
And if you go into it, and I've been there and I've done that, and this is again why I'm so passionate about this, is that I spent years of my life trying to achieve things in my practice, do things in my practice that actually turned out to be impossible. And if you've ever tried to do something that was impossible and find out that you were unable to do it, that's very frustrating. It's very disappointing. And you kind of just feel like a loser sometimes. You're like, okay, now Dharma practice is just another thing that I suck at.
Right.
And if I can help, if people who struggle with that, who have that kind of feeling, which I think is common, if I can help break that or help them reframe their practice in a way, so they're like, oh, they're aware of the limitations, and they're also aware of the possibilities. Because I think what happens is people think certain things are possible that aren't. And they think they're limited in certain ways in which they're not. So, part of it is just having a,
realistic view.
It's like a 12-year-old kid who wants to fly. It's like, kid, you could be out in the field trying all day long. It's like, dude, you're never going to fly.
Right.
Stop trying. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so a lot of times we, and this is very true in life. A lot of times we find ourselves trying to do things that are just not going to happen.
Like just overly aspirational in what we think the outcome could be.
Totally. Like a lot of it is like, people who think they're going to get sober by themselves. But, you're probably, you're more, that's probably more likely than flying, but, and so, and part of it too, I think to bring people together a bit more is that we need other people. This is not a self-help thing. Dharma is not self-help. Dharma is not something that most of us are going to be able to do alone. We need teachers, we need friends, we need fellow companions on the path. And as you know this, and I'm happy that you guys are doing what you're doing, because you're down in, you guys are based out of Louisiana, is that correct?
Mississippi, Louisiana, yeah.
Yeah, not exactly the Mecca of Western Dharma, not exactly the Bay Area, right?
Right.
So I feel a lot of affinity and feel a lot of generosity too. And I started centers in Nashville, so I really like to bring the Dharma to underserved places, because people don't realize it, but there's not, like 95% of cities or towns in America don't have a local Dharma center.
Right.
And if they do, it's probably an odd kind of religious-y kind of experience. So this is like again, when I say we're just beginning to scratch the surface, I totally mean that wholeheartedly. Like this, and most of us find out that we're just a homeschooler. We and luckily we read some books, we watch some YouTube stuff, we listen to podcasts, which I think one of the best ways to, but then again, there's just so many podcasts. Which podcast
do you pick? Right.
This teacher says this, and this teacher says that. Even within the Theravada insight tradition, which I'm from, you could take 10 different teachers from that tradition, and they're all going to teach in different kinds of ways. So one of the things that makes that hard is, yes, it's accessible. Yes, there's lots of talks, there's lots of things to listen to, but who do you listen to?
Yeah.
Who do you trust?
Yeah.
And it's not that some people are trustworthy and some people aren't trustworthy. It's just that some people are a fit for you.
Right.
And some people are not a fit for you. And trying to find the right teacher or the right perspective that's a fit for you is really actually hard.
I find that, it's very kind of confusing and overwhelming if you're skipping around and not sticking within a certain tradition or with a certain teacher. So I always kind of recommend to people, like, find someone that you do relate to and then practice what they're saying at least for 6 months to a year to
Totally.
see if you can pick up what they're putting down, kind of thing.
That's a really good suggestion.
Because it can be so overwhelming that you've listened to all these little snippets here and there, and then a year has passed and you're nowhere closer than you were when the year started. So
yeah, one thing that I learned years ago, and actually Stephen Bassett turned me on to it, was like, with this whole practice, you really have to learn how to follow and trust your own nose. You find a teacher that you like, well, read their books, listen to all their talks, stick with them for a while, like you just said, and then and take that as far as it will take you, and then keep going. But it's really hard, actually.
Yeah.
And I always tell most people, like in these interviews, like, I'm not for everybody, and I'm probably not for most. So I mean, but the thing about it is usually people that end up working with me, finding me, we usually end up having long-term relationships because, that's kind of what I'm mostly interested in anyway.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in becoming a famous, popular Buddhist teacher. I just want to be popular and famous enough to fucking fill my programs and feed my kids and pay my mortgage.
Right. Do all the things we have to do.
So trying to find the appropriate level of popularity so I don't have to, because that definitely that makes my work hard, is that I don't, I do retreats a certain place. Like if I teach at Vallecitos or Southern Dharma, if I teach at an established Dharma center, it's great because I just go and teach and they do the registration and those things fill up. But when I do my own programs, which I'd actually prefer to do, like this mindfulness-based ethical living, like I don't have the support of an organization or a monastery, or so I'm just kind of like having to do it basically from my office here, which is ground zero, using my list and social media and just trying to get the word out. And it's hard to get the word out too, because even though everybody's on their phones all the time, there's so much stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, how many emails a day does everybody get? It's really, really hard. So that's part of the dukkha of what I do.
Yeah. Well, going back to the fact that we're in the South, I mean, we love Southern Dharma too, and they have such a beautiful center. So I'm glad that you're tied in there. We of course would love to host you in this area at some point in person.
Yeah.
You have quite a big population of people in Nashville. I know that love you, and someone from Jackson, Mississippi said, "Oh my gosh, tell me about the Dave Smith thing. I love him."
Yeah, that's awesome.
Just so you know, we might have a small population here, but we're mighty.
I've talked to Justin, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to. I think it's always a lot of work and back and forth to figure this out, but I don't see why. I mean, I'd be happy to come do a 5 or a 7 day retreat, or for me to fly all the way down there and to travel, it's probably best to do something longer.
Right?
But if you guys have the bandwidth to find the place and get the food and set all that stuff
up,
we
do all that.
I don't think that would be very hard to set that up. Actually, we could probably.
Yeah, that would be great.
2024, 2025 for sure.
Yeah. And that's the great thing about the way that we kind of pop up different places is really to serve different sanghas, and we don't really have a center, so to speak. So
what do you just rent it? You do that? Yeah. So I applaud that. I've done it many times. I do it all the time. It's a lot of work. You got to find a place. You got to get the dates. You got to find the food. You got to get a contract. You got to get insurance. You got to do the registration. It's really, really, it's not easy.
Yeah, we call ourselves a traveling sangha.
That's
and
good.
Each,
I like the pop-up sangha too. That's good.
Yeah, we have a trailer. We pull that, got all the cushions, and Buddhify the space is what I tell people. So
that's awesome. Yeah, I'm sure we can figure something out. That doesn't sound like that would be too hard.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm excited about this program that you're doing with us for this half day. I feel like when I read the title, I was like, yeah, I already know about that. And now I feel like, wow, I know nothing about that. So that's pretty exciting to have a fresh perspective. And really see what you're talking about as far as learning something with a new way of looking at it, you know?
Mhm.
So I appreciate that. Anything else you want to tell us that you're doing or promote? You have your own podcast, right?
I do have a podcast, Dave Smith Dharma. You can get it on Spotify, iTunes. The one thing I would always try to just say is I try to get good outreach. So if you want to find out more about what I do, I just actually reformatted it. My website's really easy to navigate, and there's no clunkiness on it. It's all clean. My website is davesmithdharma.com. I have online classes you can sign up for. I have a mentoring program you can sign up for. I have my retreat dates. You can see most of those there. You can email me off my contact page. Because I'm not that well known, if you email me, there's a really like a 90% chance I'll email you back. It might take me a little while, but I try to respond to all the requests that I get. I don't actually get that many.
Yeah.
So if you, and the best thing to do really would be to go to my website, davesmithdharma.com, and just sign up for my newsletter.
Right.
And just to know, we don't send out that many. I probably send maybe 8 or 10 emails a year. You know, I know how it is. Sometimes you sign up for a newsletter and then you get an email from them every day. You're like,
Right.
you know,
Every
we don't
week.
do any of that. You know, you don't get that. We don't do that many, but it's usually just letting you know about these programs and where to register. So if you like what I do and you want to just stay alert of what I'm up to. I don't do a lot on social media anymore. I don't have the time or the bandwidth, and I think Facebook sucks. And you know, I'm on Instagram as little as possible. And so the best thing to do is, if you really want to stay connected, is to just get on my newsletter and just keep an eye out. And anything that I do that's of any substance, for the most part, will be in the newsletter or the website.
Okay. Let me ask you one other question about this half day. Do you feel like it is beginner friendly?
Oh, totally.
Okay.
In fact, it might be more beginner friendly than advanced friendly, because people who've been doing this for a while are going to have a lot of unlearning to deal with. Because, and just to be clear, I'm going to be presenting ideas that are mostly going to be out of line, are going to be kind of not what you've been thinking or hearing. So the beginners probably, it'd be better for the beginners. I get beginners luck, because they don't have any, they're not going to be having this kind of internal conflict of being like, Dave's saying this, but this is what I've heard.
Right.
That can be a bit, but then the good thing is we'll practice it. You can see for yourself. If you don't, you know, I'm not trying to say that I have the right version or the only version or the best version. I'm just saying there are other versions. There are different ways to look at these practices, there are different ways to look at these teachings. And I think the Buddha would applaud that. I think that he was clear about that. So also too, let's just be clear, you know, largely Buddhism has been reserved to a monastic training. You know, there's really never really been a lay Buddhist Sangha, really. In fact, even to call it a Sangha is a bit awkward, because Sangha literally means monastics. You know, the Sangha is the group of monks and nuns practicing the Dharma. So to even say that we have a Sangha is kind of an inaccurate statement.
Right.
You know, because of that, I think that even more puts us in a position to have to rethink some of these ideas, because you know, I'm not a monk. I deal with money, I deal with sexuality, I deal with society, I deal with the world, I deal with technology, I deal with banks, I deal with passwords, I deal with children, I deal with my children's friends and their teachers. I mean, I'm totally engaged, fully engaged with the secular world. Which gives rise to what I like to call secular dukkha. You know, we deal with a lot of dukkha that the monastics don't deal with. Hey, maybe they're onto something, right? Maybe there's a reason why that. But I think that if we really want the Dharma to take root, and we want the Dharma to thrive and to be practical and to be applicable in the world of modernity, there's a lot of things that we need to probably rethink. There's probably a lot of things that we need to consider, be open to, and a lot of it we're probably going to have to sort of invent.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you one last question. It's not necessarily, I mean, it is related, but it's just a kind of a pop-up question. What's been your happiest memory for the past year, in the past year?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. I have to say, probably, I actually struggle a bit with happiness. I don't love the word so much. I think that, my goal is to not, I'm more interested in things that are meaningful, which is another way to correlate happiness. In the last year, God, there's been so many. So many. Yeah, it's so hard to, it's a great question. I have so many to pull from, but I can't specifically think of one in particular.
Okay.
I think that probably not so much in the last year, but really, I think that the one thing that's been interesting to me is being, almost 50 years old and practicing for 30 years and sober for 20 years. Most of my life, I would say probably 80% of it, I never thought I would be a family man. I was always mostly single, lived alone, didn't want kids or family. And so now I have two boys, I have a wife, my parents live by, I'm sort of this middle generation. I have very old parents and very, very young kids. So, everybody needs something from me all the time.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's been the happiest, is that and I feel, I feel happy that and I find myself doing things I never thought I would do. And so in being able to, the thing that really makes me happy is being able to be a dharma teacher. This is my only job. I don't have like a psychotherapy practice, or I don't what I do. And the fact that I'm able to be a dharma teacher, to do a lot of what I do for Donna, to be able to pay a mortgage and a car payment and health insurance, and be able to do that. It's hard. It's not a snip. It's challenging, and it's confusing, and it's probably the boatload of my dukkha, which is probably true for most of us. But I really I feel happy that I'm able to do it in a way that I feel like some integrity around that. So I'm always, the thing that makes me most happy is I feel like I always have this very scared, to me, that my relationship with the Dharma is very scary, because I'm being asked to trust something, to have faith in something that I'm actually never going to completely understand. And actually, at the end of the day, there's really no guarantees.
Right.
So it's very risky. I know that's a long answer to a short question. I don't even think I answered your question.
I think you did.
Yeah.
More than one answer, but that's good.
Yeah.
How old are your kids?
4 and 10.
Wow. Yeah, they're little.
Yeah. The 10-year-old is really quite easy. He's a great kid. He's mostly fun, actually. The 4-year-old's coming out. He's going to be 5 soon. He's great. We love him to death, but he's kind of unreasonable and demanding, and
wild.
He's a pain in the ass. You know what I mean? Most of the time, he's a pain in the ass, and we love him to death. But it's like, it's so he's once he gets 5, 6 is usually when things turn around. So we're still in it, but he's he's just he's downstairs right now. Probably as soon as I get down to the bottom of the stairs, he's gonna have some request that's gonna be completely unreasonable, like a bowl of ice cream, or we want to go to Walmart, or whatever scheme he's cooking up right now is, he doesn't like to hear no.
Right.
Which is funny too when you think about dukkha, right? Like, when we don't get what we want, that's dukkha. Let me tell you, I haven't taught him 1 ounce of Buddhist teachings, but when that 4-year-old kid does not get what he wants, man, does he react.
Yeah.
So like having little kids, man, if you really want to see the 4 Noble Truths in action, not getting what he wants, he's reacting, he's clinging, he's craving, he's tantruming. It's just like, yep, the Buddha was totally right about that.
Right.
That shit's built in. I didn't teach him any of that.
Built in, that's right.
All built in. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking this time with me. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I can't wait to do this half day with you on July 22nd. So I will see you then, and I'll go ahead and try to let everyone know about your other offerings as well. So
cool, that'd be great. I appreciate that.
Yeah, nice meeting you.
You too.
Thank you. his workshop, Mindfulness and the Four Noble Truths, which is July 22nd. It's a Saturday morning. And when you sign up, you'll be able to receive a copy of the recording of this class. We hope you go to floweringlotusmeditation.org to sign up. You can sign up at the scholarship rate, which is absolutely free, or support Flowering Lotus by signing up for the $25, $50, or $75 rate. Help us to continue to offer online and in-person opportunities for learning the Dharma and meditation. Hope to see you there.
The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent.